I'm a big believer in freedom, particularly the concept of human free will. I think it was too much exposure to C.S. Lewis at an early age that did it. His book, The Problem of Pain, is truly excellent. That and the fact that Neo-Calvinism paints such a horrible picture of God. Once I discovered there was a viable alternative, I jumped at it. And if you're wondering what I do with all those predestination verses, well, I hold to a corporate interpretation, which I have to say makes best sense of all those plurals that Paul uses. So, when asked about my theological orientation, I happily refer to myself as an Arminian, and I was even fortunate enough to visit the church where Arminius is buried. Okay, so now I've got all that theology out the way, let me get to the point of this video, which I've entitled The Myth of the One. I'm assuming everyone has heard of The One. It's a well-worn trope of romantic comedy, that for every person out there, there is this perfect soulmate. The one. So everyone needs to put their love lives on hold until the universe, or if you are a believer in the divine God, brings you face to face with the one. Man, I worried about this when I was younger. Had I already met the one? Did I somehow put her off with all my frequent references to Star Wars movies? Had I missed my window of opportunity, or was my the one still out there somewhere? Perhaps I would find her at Bible college, I thought. Back then, BCV was known as the Bridal College of Victoria, so that dealt with where, but when to go. If my the one wasn't there yet, I'd be wasting my time, waiting for her to answer the call to missions, etc., etc. Oh, the anxiety this caused me. Oh, the fevered prayers I prayed, asking God to reveal the details of the plan he had for my life. Just to give you some idea, here's a poem that my angst-ridden younger self wrote. Choosing the road less travelled, with apologies to Robert Frost. It has been said that choosing the road less travelled can make all the difference in your life. But if you are caught in a maze, forced to take the same paths over and over again, knowing that they'll lead to the same dead ends, then you don't have a choice. It takes someone from beyond the 4 dimensions we call home to break the cycle, to guide you to where the walls fall away, and you are free to choose a path that has already been chosen for you. Okay, so clearly a paradoxical mashup of free will and predestination was swirling around in my head at that time. And this angst wasn't limited to life partners, because of course this idea of the one is not limited to dating. Christians often talk about God's plan for your life. Note, plan singular. But even a verse that is usually ripped out of its original context, Jeremiah 29:11, talks about plans plural. Ah, I hear you object. But Jeremiah was talking to more than one person. Exactly. Welcome to the corporate interpretation. But we still think God has one plan for our life, one job that he has uniquely gifted us for, one mission organisation to join, one country in which to serve him, and one partner to share that life of ministry with. To that, with the benefit of hindsight and the wisdom that comes with grey hair, I say no. No, I don't think God works that way. The whole idea of the one is a myth. And interestingly, if you Google myth of the one, you will find quite a lot of blog posts and articles written by people who agree with me. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the internet is never wrong, right? Well, let's deal with the myth of the one as it applies to finding your life partner first. I'm not a major fan of romantic comedies, but I watch them every so often. Partly, I just get annoyed at their formulaic nature. First, there's the meet cute, where the 2 protagonists encounter one another for the first time. Then there are the reflective friends, the secondary characters, usually somewhat quirky, who often bring a lot of the comedy. Most of the movie involves the 2 protagonists lying to each other, or at the very least, constantly misunderstanding each other. Of course, these plot complications are necessary to make an involving story. There's not much point watching a movie where boy meets girl, they get married, and they live happily ever after. Where's the fun in that? At some point, we have the exit and the chase. Finally, when the chaser catches up with the chased, there's the speech and the kiss. As I said, formulaic. But the other thing about romantic comedies is they often assume that there's only one person out there who's exactly perfect for you. And to be honest, it's even worse in Christian circles, because we have this view of God's plan for our life stretching out from birth to death like a single train track. And we hope that God has picked someone out for us and has a plan for them that will, at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, join up with ours. But how do we know if someone is the one? This is the million-dollar question. Some say, when you know, you know. Christians might spiritualize this by claiming some sort of divine revelation, which leads to that dreadful Christian pickup line, God told me that we should be dating. Okay, I'm not wanting to say God doesn't give guidance, but most of the time the way people decide on the one is through their emotions and physical attraction. And then later, when the emotions inevitably fade, you're left thinking you made a mistake, that the person you've ended up with wasn't the one after all, but this person over here, to whom I am now feeling strong emotions for, well, they just might be. When I think back to my early 20s, there's actually a few people I might have married. It would not have taken much for me to have made slightly different choices at various points along the way, and things would have turned out completely differently. And I think those choices I faced were real choices. God was letting me make certain decisions which He would then incorporate into His bigger plans, because God is big enough to be able to handle it. We actually see this sort of thing in the Bible. God says He's going to wipe the Israelites out and start again with Moses, but Moses intercedes and changes God's mind. The prophet Isaiah tells Hezekiah he's going to die. But Hezekiah cries out to God, God hears his prayer and stops Isaiah in his tracks as he's hot-footing it from the palace. And God gives Hezekiah 15 more years, even moving the sun backwards as a sign. I know some people interpret these passages as God merely testing people. He wasn't really going to wipe the Israelites out. Hezekiah wasn't really going to die. But that just makes God out to be mean or tricksy. It's far better to see God prepared to adapt to our choices. So, welcome to choice. Now, with respect to life partners, I wouldn't go so far as to say you could marry just anyone. It still needs to make sense. At the very least, you should be able to be friends with the person. And you should have similar ideas about what you want to do in life. Part of what brought my wife and I together was that we were both interested in serving overseas with Wycliffe Bible translators. Heck, I'd even go so far as to say that it helps if you have similar theologies. Belief in a literal six-day creation was a dating deal breaker for me. Now, I'm sure you can come up with your own list of requirements. And of course, it takes two to tango. Your potential partner will have their own list. But presumably, your list of requirements becomes a short list of potential life partners. And if someone on your short list has you on their short list, then go for it. Start dating. Get to know them better. See if your friendship deepens. Don't look for perfection, but definitely look for connection. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in the mechanics of dating. My point is, if you have a short list of potential life partners, you really could choose to marry any one of them. By all means, involve God in the process. He may even, in contradiction to pretty much everything I've said up to this point, have specific things to say. And if you get guidance like that, you would do well to listen. But don't delay your decision waiting for a sign from above. Go ahead and make a choice. Because, and this is important, love is a decision of the will. It's not an emotion. You choose to be with someone. And then, once you've made your choice, the irony, then you sort of are with the one. Because marriage is supposed to be till death us do part. Footnote, sometimes divorce is actually very much an appropriate choice. And it's a similar deal with life plans. God does not have a plan singular for your life that you have to somehow discover. But if you make a mistake or something goes wrong, then you're left with a sense of failure, that you missed it, that you'll have to somehow make do with plan B or plan C or even plan Z. No, there are a lot of things you and God could do together with your life. Again, it should still make sense. Your decisions should be based on things like your gifts and abilities, your interests, and I would hope God's leading too. But God still allows us to choose. And what we choose gets incorporated into God's ultimate plan for the world. So, go ahead and make your choice. Besides, it's easier to steer something that's moving. And of course, God is perfectly capable of shutting doors if it should come to that. One thing that has led me to the conclusion that God's plans for us are potentially multivarious is experience. I've seen a number of missionaries return home as a result of circumstances outside of their control. Things like being kicked out of a country for no good reason at all, or health reasons. If you believe that God's plan singular for your life is to plant churches in Mongolia, but after 2 years on the field, your 6-year-old son is diagnosed with a behavioural disorder that requires a level of educational support that just doesn't exist there, meaning that you have to return to your home country, then you will either be angry at God for giving you that particular child, or question whether you heard God correctly in the first place. Instead, see this return as an opportunity. When things go wrong, or we make a mistake, after all we're still human, well that just means we go back to the drawing board and see what possibilities exist in the new situation. It's a chance to come up with a new plan A to the glory of God. Look, I have to be honest at this point. I've gone back and forth over whether to make this video. I know it's been rather light on content, that I've gone for humour and obvious jokes. Worst of all, I've barely referred to the Bible. But the reason I vacillated is that there is a paradox here. Okay, maybe that was too subtle a joke. Paradox? Seriously, the relationship between God's plan, predestination, and human choice, free will, is paradoxical. Most of the time, though, we only hear about God's plan singular. So I guess I've pushed the pendulum over to the other extreme by emphasizing choice. But again, if I'm honest, when I was younger, I was dead keen to discover God's plan singular and the one God had chosen for me to walk that plan with. And God did lead me to my wife, and He did lead us to the mission field. And I have to say, I think it worked out pretty well. So while I still think God allows us to choose, some of those choices may not be as fulfilling as others. I remember hearing about an older gentleman who would come out to the Wycliffe National Centre for Working Bees. Apparently in his younger days he really felt God calling him to mission with Wycliffe, but he'd turned his back on that call. And he said his life had turned out to be rather second-rate, that he always regretted not following what he thought God was calling him to. So here he was in his twilight years doing what he could to make up for it. So maybe after all of that, God does have a plan singular for your life. Or maybe His plans for you really are multivarious. I guess what I'm trying to say is just relax a little. You may be facing choices, but if God is not making it blindingly obvious, then maybe He wants to see which way you'll decide. And it's never too late to rethink our choices down the track. Apart from marriage, that is. Footnote, see earlier footnote. So, freedom. Yes, it's a little scary because freedom brings with it possibilities. But in giving us freedom, God gives us the opportunity to be co-creators with Him. He wants us to be involved in the important decisions of our lives, and He's big enough to handle what we decide. And that's hugely exciting.